This week on the Cameron Journal podcast, we're talking with Kent Kemmish. He owns a biotech startup called Demonpore, and he uses nanopores to create a gamified environment where you can do your own chemical testing for all sorts of things from home and contribute to scientific research. It's all very exciting. It's all very interesting. I have a variety of concerns and questions about this technology. We're also joined by local activist Aaron Woody, who is an old friend of mine from my underground media days in Colorado. I met him when I was in college. He doesn't really introduce himself, but he does a lot of local activism. He's known for activism in the Fort Collins area. I met Kent through him. They knew each other back in the day. And it is really interesting to get a peek into the world of biotech and what is coming to us from this industry. Biotech is huge. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Kent's already had a successful biotech startup. And so I was very interested to talk to him about what it's like to bring testing, chemical testing, and all this type of thing into people's homes, and also to make it like a video game. So we go through the product, we go through some of the games, and we go through some of the concerns with the outcomes of the research he's collecting, the data, and all this sort of thing. And I asked some pretty poignant questions about all of that. Afterwards, he said it was the most poignant interview and most provocative that he'd ever been involved with. So I think it's all very interesting. This is a long conversation. We talk about a variety of things. Kent is a bit rambly. I've tried to kind of cut it down a little bit, but I kind of let people talk and I like to keep the purity of an interview. So this is a long ride, but it's one worth taking. So let's get started. This is Kent Kemmish and the new Demonpore 64 biology video game / chemical testing machine. This is the Cameron Journal podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal podcast. On the Cameron Journal podcast, we are joined by Kent Kemmish. He is a founder and inventor of a very interesting machine that is going to gamify experimentation in biotech. It is Atari meets citizen science. He's produced a little machine called the Demonpore 64, and we're going to talk about citizen science, how this machine came about, and one of the topics I'm very passionate about, which is industrial waste. This machine is going to allow you to be able, through its system of gamification, to study industrial waste in your neighborhood, all this type of thing, kind of democratize testing, which is currently dominated by government and institutions. We're also joined by an old friend of mine personally, and hopefully a new friend to the podcast. Woody is a delightful person. In one of the first businesses I ever did, he and I worked on a little zine together that he'd been producing for quite some time. And it was absolutely insane, as any good zine is. And he reconnected with me and kind of brought Kent to me. So we're ever so grateful for him introducing this. Would have never found out about it otherwise. So welcome, guys, to the Cameron Journal podcast. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Excellent. So, Kent, we'll start with you. Why don't you give us your name and how you got into the biotech space?
My name's Kent Kemmish, and I got into the biotech space after sort of, I think maybe in my 1920s. In my 20s, I think my life was a bit like Jack Kerouac's, come to think of it. Or I tell people who who wouldn't get the reference if I say I wanted to be Thomas Pynchon. I tell you that I had a life like Jack Kerouac's. I was an artist, as a theater person, as someone who explored reality a lot, hitchhiked all over the country, sort of lived existentially, kind of mystically a lot. That's when I met Woody during that sort of period of my life where I had been this super like technical, scientifically oriented, straight A kind of student up to a certain age, say maybe 12, 13. And then I said, screw all that, and kind of had some things in my life that made me turn to the more emotional, thonic, intuitive aspect of being a sentient being. And I didn't come back to being like sort of a rationalist, scientifically focused person until my late 20s. After that, wrote a few awful postmodern novels that I thought were the next Gravity's Rainbow. Hung out with Woody doing crazy things in Northern California, Colorado, same thing.
Yeah.
And but I'd always harbored this dream in the back of my mind that we needed to create some sort of. I had dreams as a very little kid, like someday I'd have a cubic mile underground laboratory on the moon or something. I dreamed of this fantastic, futuristic, visionary, far future that I thought would be there by like the 90s when I was a little kid in the 80s. I didn't really come back to that part of myself until like my mid-20s, where I said to myself, well, I just sort of decided that the art thing wasn't for me, that I just kind of encountered this sense that like, even if I could be like the greatest novelist ever, that I wouldn't like fundamentally change the dynamic of human suffering. Like the people I admire the most, the novelists I worship, the artists I worship, I came to the feeling art makes life worth living, but I don't know if it's a central part of life, absolutely. But I really want to cure diseases. I really want to get to the basis of what existence is, what consciousness is, et cetera, et cetera. Pursued this scientifically. So I dropped out of college. I was a total, what do you say, underachiever, like somebody who could have gone to Harvard and done everything perfectly at a young age. And I said, screw all that. I'm gonna go down the rough roads of genius with friends like Woody. And then I came back to that. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to school. I'm gonna actually become a scientist, so I know what I'm talking about. I went back to school when I was 29. I went to the University of Arizona after my 20s, trying to be Jack Kerouac / Thomas Pynchon / whatever. And I did well because I was already 29. It sowed all my wild oats, although I still have plenty in a way. I was very focused on it. I did everything perfectly. Like I did exactly what I would have done if I had been like an overachieving kid who was fulfilling his full potential when I was 17 instead of 29. Had the 4.0 GPA, was doing like research in a Drosophila lab. It was like postdoc level by the time I was done with it, but I was still an undergrad. But I still had this notion of like, the biggest thing we could do would be to cure aging, to fundamentally solve human biology. That was my goal. That was my dream, and I was pretty deep into that. And I went to work for Aubrey de Grey at the Methuselah Foundation. That started like my whole career in biotech, and in actually there are a lot of loud background noises. Is that, I guess that had sort of like artistic. We'll just yeah, that's the aleatoric music aspect of this podcast. Yeah, I'm fine with it if Cameron is. So, so I became a geneticist, worked really hard, then I got into biotech. I actually dropped out of undergrad with like 3 months to go and a perfect GPA, and I was going to go to Cambridge University, blah, blah, blah. But instead, I went to Silicon Valley and got a $30 million education with a biotech startup that was doing some really ambitious things. We were the first people on Earth to sequence DNA with electron microscopes, and we were doing some really like far out futuristic stuff. And now that's all like 12 years ago, and that gives me my sense of how technology moves and develops in the world. And like my formal career in like startup world, it's involved 3 or 4 startups now, depending on how you count. One of which went on to become a unicorn. I was part of the early team of a company called Synthago that's like the premier supplier of CRISPR reagents now. Around 2012, actually, I had this idea for a nanopore technology that a friend of mine said you should call it Demonpore. And to explain why, we got to get into what nanopores are and how they work, etc. But just to sort of keep that story short, nanopores are a way of getting information about everything from cells to molecules. Whatever comes through this tiny hole gets measured by electrical changes that occur because it passes through the hole. And I worked at a very fundamental level, like working on breakthroughs in a very constrained way, just in the nanopore tech itself. And I was kind of following a game plan of, well, this is the game plan that several initiatives, projects, companies have followed, is that you get some really cool thing to work for the first time in the world, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. I'm the first person to ever do this like really cool achievement in nanotech. And then I'm going to go get $100 million. I'm going to hire 100 people, and we're going to sit in a room with all these engineers and scientists for a couple of years, and then we're going to release some big, expensive, perfect product that we sell to other scientists and engineers. And I kind of I hit a break point with that a few years ago, where I realized I didn't want to do that. I'd much rather take what I understood about these detectors and make something that the most people I could imagine would want to play with and would be able to play with, would be able to do things with, without any of the PhD level of understanding that you typically need to do sophisticated things with technologies like that. And that was the genesis of this notion that we're going to make one of these instruments, instead of making it something that you need years of training to use at a highly skilled level, we're going to make it as easy to use as a toy. And that was the genesis of the Demonpore 64. And where we're at now is we're about to we're pretty close to shipping the first Demonpore 64 to alpha testers, and looking at full product launch into next year. And the Demonpore 64 basically lets you put stuff inside of it, and the stuff produces signals, and those signals generate gaming experiences. And the rationale behind that is that nanopore sensing itself still has a long way to go to be as powerful as it has the potential to be. So let's just take, aside from the environmental concerns about anything related to nuclear, let's take nuclear fusion research as an example. If we knew how to do nuclear fusion, and again, never mind the environmental issues around nuclear, because it's a really deep rabbit hole. But if we had nuclear fusion, it could be vastly better than nuclear fission. It would be vastly better in terms of being able to provide energy. So on that level, it would be a good thing. But it costs, you need hundreds of millions of dollars to do fusion research. And there aren't that many people in the world to do it. If you wanted to accelerate it in a way like I'm trying to do with nanopore research, there's no way you could do that, because you couldn't, like, it would be absurd to even think that you could crowdsource the development of that. But nanopores on one level, like, are probably, well, are a much greater, less sort of morally complicated good for mankind, because what they are is the likely backbone of utility scale molecular sensing. By which I mean, we want to have a world, our 10-year goal with the company, which is, it's now called Molecular Reality Corporation. It was called Demonpore before, and then we changed the name after some pseudo death threats from the countries. Now it's called Molecular Reality Corporation. The console is still called the Demonpore 64. But this is a lot to unpack, Cameron. Well, I don't know.
Well, you've kind of jumped ahead.
Yeah.
I have not had a chance to ask any questions specifically.
You gotta just interrupt me, because if you don't just interrupt me, I will just ramble. So.
Well, no, I tend to let people talk. That's my style. I tend not to interrupt people a lot. But
I'll finish it though, and then let me finish this one point. Just the one broad point. Is it my goal is that 10 years, virtually everyone on the planet who wants to can get information about cells and molecules around them as easily as you now go on the internet. That you can take that ability to have vision of this other plane of reality that we can't see now, but that is incredibly important in the way it affects our lives. It's like literally what we are. It's the substrate of our consciousness physically. It's everything we eat, breathe, every molecule in our body is part of molecular reality all around us and inside us, this vast, teeming, mysterious plane of reality that we can't see. And I want to make it so that anyone in the world, easily, cheaply, without expert knowledge, can just know what's there and interrogate it. And as a consequence of that, we'll never have another pandemic. That's unless people want to have another pandemic, and they thought this one has been fun. And we'll also have a really, really profound, potentially comprehensive understanding of human biology and disease. So that disease will eventually become a choice and not something that you're stuck slowly being tortured by. So yeah, that's it. Molecular sensing is a vital utility for the world. That's my calling to create that. And it starts with this little advanced scientific instrument disguised as a toy.
It seems like that there would be so many applications that you could do with stuff like that. Anything from philology or anything like that. Identifying species of fungus or algae and lichens, if you're into that sort of thing.
Discovering new ones.
Oh, exactly.
You probably have some in your backyard.
Identify parasitic plant tissue that's not visibly identifiable, but separating it from the host plant, by its genetic materials, or even mapping out large mycelium bodies.
I think you could probably fill a 1,500-page book with like size 5 font of just different cool things you could do if you arbitrarily see anything around you on a molecular cellular level. It's a whole universe. It's more exciting to me than going to other planets. It's literally like this other dimension I want to open up and let people see.
Well, I think that's my next question is, why on earth would anybody care? Why would people want to see this reality? We've existed for, 100,000 years without knowing much about it. Germ theory was familiar to the ancient Greeks, but it didn't get legs until the modern scientific method. Why would somebody buy this? Why would they be excited about it? Why would they use it?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. So my first thought was, anyone who's ever lost a loved one to cancer Anyone who's ever, I mean, disease is molecular. Disease has a molecular basis. There are definitely some pathological processes that are like physical, like if somebody shoots you, but that's not really a disease. So you ever lost anybody to cancer? If you've ever experienced age-related illness, when we talk about curing aging, we want to spread the message. When I talk about curing aging, I really want to immediately spread the message before people start talking about the perception of transhumanists as like selfish, crazy billionaires who want to live forever. I just immediately shut that down and say, no. Do you know what the major, by far, risk factor for cancer is? It's aging, by far. And then, like, I mentioned this, hoping this is something that most people may not be aware of.
Cellular sentience?
Senescence.
Okay, sorry.
Senescence is literally defined as the functional breakdown that increases the odds of pathology arising, of disease arising. In the case of cells, cellular senescence is definitely part of the complicated hydra that is human aging. It's
and the Hayflick limit too, I would imagine.
Yeah, the Hayflick limit is I was literally just having dinner with a good friend of the one of the most important people in telomere biology in the past, like literally 2 hours ago, having dinner with two good friends of this person named Mike West, who was basically responsible for the first cloning of telomerase. So this is all very close to me. This is like the stuff that I live and breathe.
And telomeres are the little things that control aging, I understand.
They get shorter.
Well,
the more times they does it reproduce or they're divide?
So telomeres are part of an incredibly complicated, messy phenomenon that's full of contradictions. Telomeres are related to aging in a very complicated way that I'm not sure. So when you I need to figure out how to talk about this better, because I mean, yeah, telomeres are involved in human aging. I don't want to make a point of exactly what words you're using, but you wouldn't say they control aging. We wouldn't say they control aging. But I also don't want this to become a lesson in molecular biology, because that might be boring. There's a lot of fascinating stuff there. I love to talk about it. I love to teach it. I would have a huge passion for just like, I taught undergrads molecular and cellular biology. I had great pleasure doing so. But yeah, telomeres, things at the end of the chromosomes that protect them and that evolutionarily allowed for the loss of the ends that happen as they replicate. That has to do with like the direction that DNA is copied. Yeah. So, okay, where are we going?
Well, we're talking about why someone would buy this machine and use it. And you mentioned, aging, all this type of thing. And I'm curious as to, why because I know that one of the games, there's like 7 games you can play with this. And I know one of them has to do with aging. It all contributes to like scientific research into the cloud, all this type of thing.
Yeah.
Similar to, there's a website where you can fold proteins, and if you find a new innovative way to fold them, then the scientists will keep track of this. So in a similar manner. And so I'm trying to understand, why someone would want to, buy this machine and contribute to that sort of thing. And the question is sort of existential. If we start living a lot longer, there's a lot of social implications to that. So perhaps talk about, kind of the fight against aging, how the Demonpore 64 interacts with it, and and some of your concerns with radically extending the human lifespan.
Yeah, I'm not. So this is a. I kind of. This is such a Russian dolls of like issues and things to sort out, and it's. I'm in a bubble in a sense, and it's kind of hard to talk out of that bubble. I need to get better at that. So we'll start okay. All right. So the negative things about curing aging. The most obvious of which is overpopulation, which would absolutely suck. We don't want too many people on the planet. No doubt. And like a first order response to that is, okay, what if you had to choose? You can either live 1,000 years and not have any kids, or you get to have all the kids you want, but you got to accept a normal human lifespan. Which would you prefer?
Oh, I'd go without the kids. Of course, I'd go that way anyways.
and by 1,000 years, I also want to bring up, sometimes when we talk about curing aging, we get what's called the Tithonus fallacy. I think that's how his name was pronounced. Tithonus was this figure in Greek mythology who was like cursed to live forever, but they didn't specify that he would stay healthy and young. So he ended up being like this little bit like horrifying cricket-like creature that could never die. And the Tithonus fallacy, I bring that up when we talk about curing aging because we're not talking about extending the horrors of old age for 1,000 years. We're talking about rejuvenation. We're talking about robust physical health indefinitely. So, and that's important to state because who the hell would want to become a cricket unless you're just a big fan of crickets? But it's not so much about the physical form, but your brain will probably not be that functional anymore. So that's one issue. So you have that trade-off, right? But it's deeper than that. I'll just cut. Let me cut to what I propose, which, like to me, sort of the grand. Let me kind of frame this in the biggest sort of cutting through all the little weeds of things that we may not have like a common mainstream cultural that mainstream culture at any level, wherever you hear it, you turn on the TV, right, left of the political spectrum, it doesn't matter. Nobody is talking about these things in a coherent, meaningful way. But to me and my friends, these are the most important things facing humanity. Period. This is this is like my grand compromise. There's this great debate between Zoltan Istvan, who is a presidential candidate for the Transhumanist Party, and this other guy who is like one of the premier proponents of the philosophy of primitivism. And primitivists are basically like the Unabomber without terrorism. They think we should completely give up technology. We should go back to the land. It's all bad. It was bad that we ever mined metals out of the ground. It's just bad. We need to go back to being like living in tribes, hunters and gatherers. Fuck technology. These are like the thing is, watching that debate, I could feel and empathize with everything that the primitivist hates about technology, about the world that we've created. And I get it. Like, so much technology sucks. It hasn't made us happier. And I also think like a certain thing that maybe some transhumanists would say is sort of sentimentalist or weak-minded, is this sort of reverence for and treating nature as sacred. But I have great empathy for that, and I want to respect it. And so my grand compromise is essentially leave Earth as a nature preserve, do whatever we want in the stars. There's so much apparently dead material, perhaps dead material, maybe not, all over the solar system. We could create whatever we want out there. Let's protect Earth, even if just some people think it's sentimental. Keep Earth wild as much as possible. Obviously, we shouldn't be releasing those balloons into the fucking groundwater. There are all sorts of really stupid things we're doing to fuck up the planet. And whatever your take is on that, it's just like my proposed people. So on the extremely far end of the spectrum are transhumanists who literally believe that all matter should be turned into Computron. Like I've known people like this. That anything but super intelligence with the most powerful artificial general intelligence you could possibly build is like what we should be doing with our lives. That's called the cosmos perspective, and this is another debate where they're competing camps of transhumanism, which is a diverse set of thoughts that encompasses people who are very much transhumanist progressives and Buddhists and very much into the compassion angle of curing diseases. And then at the extreme other end, there are people who are into transhumanism because of power and dominance. And I kind of call them the vampire transhumanists. I kind of see it as like the elf transhumanists and the vampire transhumanists, and I'm very much on the elf side. But what elves and vampires have in common is living forever or very long lifespans. I don't want to be a vampire, although I can see the romance of it to some extent. Maybe you can be a vampire elf. I don't know. And why isn't there a movie with vampire elves? I don't know that either. Maybe it's a bit too high concept. But yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about here. A lot of stuff to unpack.
Well, yes. So let us begin that process. So there's this kind of, you've created this machine, and you can get one for the low investment of $100. And I think it is interesting to think about why, even just like, I want to get to industrial waste, but for aging first.
Yeah.
How is the Demonpore 64 going to contribute to anti-aging research? Like, what exactly does it do, and how is it going to advance the science? Okay,
so just to keep this from being a 40-hour conversation, maybe it's some significant fraction of that, but I think at some point we'll need to sleep. We'll skip to the role of seeing cells and molecules in aging research. So aging is a cellular molecular phenomenon. And if you just look at any research that's done in biogerontology or biomedicine period, whether it's cancer, heart disease, whatever, it involves detecting and characterizing cells and molecules in different contexts. Where that stops is when there's actual research in whole organ systems and in whole living creatures, and we stop at that point. In fact, personally, I think personally, I don't think we should do animal research on things with more than 100,000 neurons, maybe 1 million. But that's where I'm compatible with animal rights activists, pretty much. But I did kill 6 million flies when I was doing Drosophila research, so I don't think there's anything morally problematic about killing flies for trying to cure cancer. But I don't think we need to kill mice, and there's a reason for that, because we've cured cancer in mice so many times, and humans are not mice, so that doesn't mean we have the cure for cancer in humans. So how it contributes to aging research? Well, there's going to be one particular game called Dragon Tyrant Must Die, which is a reference to a very popular short story called The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant by Nick Bostrom. You've possibly heard of Nick Bostrom if you've heard Elon Musk talk about simulation theory. The argument that Elon presents about the likelihood that we're in a simulation is derived from academic papers that Nick Bostrom published a few decades ago, where he actually, with the formal academic version of those arguments, you may have heard that if we have increasingly realistic simulations in this world, then it sort of stands to reason, like, why would we be the first ever? And if we can do it here, then we're probably in some kind of ancestor simulation, or we're being simulated by something else. Because if it's possible at all to do that, then it's probably happened so many times, or will happen so many times, that it would be kind of insane to think we were lucky enough to be the very first ever. So we're probably in a simulation based on that argument. And and that's where Nick Bostrom comes in. He's the founder of one of the early transhumanist organizations. But Fable of the Dragon Tyrant it's a great little short story that where the dragon tyrant is aging. So aging kills 100,000 people a day. It is the major risk factor for cancer and heart disease. It is the most damaging thing to all economies in the world, including third world countries. It has more of an effect than infectious disease. It has more of an effect than climate change. Like, it is the number one global driver of limits to the economy, of damage to the economy. This is another thing that I'm telling you this, and this is like, in the subculture of transhumanism, we just know this, but we never hear this in the media at all. Like, you never hear about aging even talked about as a disease or a problem that should be solved because of those objections that, without that conversation to be had, that come up with regularity when we talk to people about it, such as the overpopulation concern, only the rich would get it, and then there are like 7 others that are like the typical things that people come up with when they're debunking it for the first time or thinking about it for the first time. But Dragon Tyrant Must Die is a way that people, while playing a sort of role-playing game that involves detecting some of the biomarkers associated with aging in different experimental contexts, where they can just approach it as a game and play it as a game and have fun with it as a game, but they're really contributing data at first from reagents that are helping the scientists behind the games design, that are helping the scientists behind the games get more and more data for the experiments that they've set up that are gamified. And fast forward a few years or even several years, that eventually becomes like population scale, longitudinal explorations of both rejuvenative therapies and new biomarkers and new understandings. So we still have a ton to learn about biology on a very fundamental level. When we look at a single cell, a human cell, we still have no idea what like half of the parts even do. So if you imagine a car, right? Like, a car has a limited number of parts. You can wrap your head around them. You know what they are. In the case of biology, it's like there are literally millions of parts. And for most of them, we don't have a clue of why they're there or what they do. And the ability to see them and process them in the experimental context of putting them through these nanopores, that's what this project is really all about. It's about creating the most powerful scientific instrument collectively that the world has ever seen by letting people operate that instrument while just having fun and not having to study for a PhD. So hopefully this is making sense.
Yes, no, I do see that. I think there are a lot of, and I've had this conversation on this podcast a few times. One of my problems with a lot of these new proposed technologies and ideas and all this type of thing is the people usually involved in working on them never think about the social costs of what they're doing. I had on a gentleman last year, and we were talking about 3D printing and distributed manufacturing, as well as AI, but particularly 3D printing. And he said he was at a conference in China, and he told executives at plastic molding companies that 3D printing was going to come along and basically render all of their businesses obsolete in the next 20 years. As you can imagine, jaws dropped, and they were not happy to hear about this prospect. And this is something where, when I said, the march of technology has happened a great deal in my lifetime, and I'm only 33. It's happened a great deal in my lifetime, and the benefits have not been evenly distributed. It has adversely affected people. And if you want to get into the whole, people losing jobs and committing suicide and all this type of thing, technology has destroyed many a marriage and has killed a lot of people in very ancillary ways. And he had never, until that moment, really thought about what the effect on society would be if 3D printing and distributed manufacturing was widely available. What would people do? All this sort of thing. And so I'm coming along and being like, look, I'm a journalist and I'm a writer. Technology has turned my entire industry upside down, shooken us, and left us with very little. It took all of our lunch money and then some, and our shirt and our shoes. And I said, 3D printing, when you start thinking about that, that's going to have huge adverse effects on the global economy. And he never really thought about that. And so one of the frustrations I have is that when we have these conversations like, radical human life expansion and all this type of thing, typically the people who are promoting these ideas have never given a second thought to the social ramifications of this. Now, I can see economically, of course, fixing demographics would be tremendous, especially in the Western world. We all have falling demographics. Many countries in Europe have a birth rate that's practically unremarkable. China had the one-child policy for years and years to reduce its population, realized they did too good a job, and now they have the three-child policy, and they're trying to get people to have kids. The only difficulty is they have very few women and way too many men, and that's just going to be a problem that they're going to be dealing with for quite some time. And so I guess my question, my thought is, in all of this, I guess, conversation you're having in the transhumanist circles and all this type of thing, and I know a little bit about this because I read Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. I used to be a member of lesswrong.org, which is a big reason, rationality, thought, think group, all this type of thing. Yes. I was the only artist to be seen for miles at that website.
I believe it. Yeah.
And yes, and all this type of thing. I mean, is anyone really thinking about what happens when people start living to 120? So many institutions in our society are predicated on people, retiring and moving on, or dying and moving on. What happens when people start living into their 120s? I mean, that has effect on social programs, housing, employment opportunities, education opportunities, old age care, such as it is, all this type of thing. Huge, huge fundamental effects. And most of the people I've heard talking about this in popular culture don't seem to care if they've even thought about it at all. What would you say to people who have those concerns and want to know how to prepare society for this eventuality?
Yeah, wow, you were on Less Wrong, nice, and you knew who Big Nick Bostrom was. It's pretty cool. Not a lot of people do. So there's so much to unpack there, Cameron. I'm coming at this from a.
I'm a journalist. We think about this stuff all the time. We look at what you do, and we're the ones that sit around being like, well, it's going to affect, and especially I have 2 degrees in political science. I look at it and say, oh my goodness, there's going to be this social effect and we're going to have to raise the age of Social Security and how our tax is going to work. And, we're going to need social support programs for all this type of thing, and if we're going to extend aging, we're probably not going to be able to extend childbearing years. So we're still going to be stuck with very old people and they're now very old children. And they're like, you end up with, a great grandma in her 120s, her children in her 80s, and her grandchildren in their 50s. I mean, this is, a thing. Like my Nana at 82 has children in her 50s and grandchildren in their 30s. So like using current human lifestyle, like this is already a problem. These sorts of things, like it seems like people like you and other people who are working on this, you guys are marching forward at a rapid pace to where we might have something that might start doing this by the end of the decade. Society's not ready. And the conversation around it isn't about hey, this is coming, let's get ready for it. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, we're working on this and it'll be really great and all this type of thing. And it seems like we're not having that conversation of how do we get society ready for people that live dramatically longer and do so at health.
Right.
Well, we're really in the wilderness with that sort of thing.
But that's why I'm asking this question this is the conversation that needs to be having to be had. If this is coming, we need to start talking about it now. And that's what we're doing. We're starting the rock down the road.
I mean, if you look at some of the developments that are going on right now, just Elon Musk, the advancements that he's made, the directions that we're going of that, getting off of this rock, or at least getting off and being able to go to other places is that's going to open up a availability of other resources and whatnot. So I don't think it's that there's a great unknown to it, but if the two forces basically go and move in the same direction, which I think they would get, complementary. It is a great unknown, but at the same time, the benefits that could be reaped from that, there's just so much there.
Well,
no, and certainly, sorry, Ken, I will say this. Certainly, I recognize the benefits that are to be reaped. Several years ago, when I had the old Cameron Cowan show, I interviewed a young man who was extremely passionate about going to the moon. He had a whole plan on how to build bases and effectively live underground, but with sunlight on the moon. And he wanted to build these sort of 3D structures, like imagine Manhattan, but you were able to walk from one building to another building to another building without ever going down to street level. That underground on the moon. And he would go to conferences and be like, I have the whole plan. I just need $100 million to make it happen, sort of thing. And he like genuinely believed like this was a thing. He had it all figured out. I mean, he had budgets, costs, materials, everything went up. I mean, if somebody really wanted to waste $100 million on this kid, he probably could figure out some way to get to the moon and live there. And so and getting off the planet, I think is another thing that we can't stop. But here's the thing. We've already lived the story of technology gone awry once. And so like imagine we're having a conversation about globalization in 1999. And we're about to have the World Trade Organization conference here in Seattle, which caused riots. Because we love to riot here. And we're talking about China getting most favored nation status, and we're talking about a radical opening up of the global economy, less capital controls, all this type of thing. The Asian financial crisis has just happened. We've kind of seen the early effects of globalization, and we're having this conversation about, globalization is coming. What will that mean for the economy? All this type of thing. And we never had the conversation where we said, what are we going to do with 500,000 people who are going to get displaced from manufacturing jobs? We never had that conversation. And then 8 years later, we had a recession, and it has radically affected society. So I propose that we don't make that mistake again and we start having the conversations like these about aging and how it's going to affect society now. So by the time Kent and all of his people can figure out how to make us live to 120, with, you know, maybe the health of our mid 50s, then, you know, we're going to be ready and have government policy in place to manage this transition. So I think we have to map that wilderness now before Kent gets done building it.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that period of time too. That was also fairly devastating for Chiapas, Mexico. The Zapatista movement, had its origin in that, and they had to do a lot of soul searching about what the future was going to look like if they were able to survive this globalist expansion. What would their lives look like? What cultural things could they hold on to? And it's kind of interesting. They basically came to the conclusion that they're doomed, but they're kind of like, as the Subcomandante de Marcos said, oh, geez. Is basically that.
Is that my connection or Woody's? Cameron?
We're not having any connection issues right now.
No, I just had a brain fart.
Paraphrase this quote for us. What was the gist of what
I don't know. I'm having like an Alzheimer's moment. Well, what's the book with the guy, the Spaniard that goes and thinks that a windmill is a giant? Thank you.
Don Quixote. Yeah.
But yeah, they kind of take on this aspect that it's worth fighting, but they're sort of at the same time for this to hedge their bets, being the carrying the banner for lost causes. But if you look at the way that they've adapted at it, that their communities are actually going pretty well, and they've adapted very well. They haven't taken any money from the Mexican government, but certainly what the forces that were working against them, you actually do really have to take that the globalization seriously, and nobody really cared in the Western press either. Yeah, there's definitely. I understand where Cameron's kind of coming from on this one. I think me and Kent were talking about something similar to this with information hazards, but the benefits though. We're just plagued with all kinds of problems, environmental problems. The fucking heat, the temperature that's going up, we're baking, forest fires are blazing across the planet. Fukushima is still leaking chemicals into the ocean. Our water is polluted. We got a lot of issues that we need to get the ball rolling on, and democratization of going and sampling is going to be so fundamental in dealing with those kind of issues, because in the scientific community, there's only so many people that are qualified, quote unquote, to go and do the sampling. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many things that you would think there'd be studies on or sampling done. And when you go and actually look at the literature and whatnot, the white papers and gray literature, there's nothing there. They only have so many hands. So if the device is calibrated and everything, and it's accurate, and you democratize the sampling, you get people to go and take sampling from all sorts of different places. You can speed up these processes, because when you see the reluctance in the political sphere to take any of these things seriously, you're going to have to trick people into going and taking this seriously, or at least participating in getting the ball rolling on this. And I think that's one of the things that really caught my eye about this project with the Demonpore is the potential to add, kick the process in the pants. You know what I mean?
Yes, no, and we're going to get to industrial waste here in a minute. But let's wrap up our conversation on aging. Kent, you had something to say, and we've not been letting you say it. So here's your chance.
Oh, I have the problem is I kind of have too much to say. It's it's not. You're right. We're not having the conversation like the world publicly, and I think that's what you mean. Like you probably never heard Rachel Maddow say anything about life extension, and if she has, it's probably look at those evil billionaires who want to extend life, which sucks because I love Rachel, and I'm sure she would regard me as one of those horrible, selfish people. I think so. In your very fair critique there.
Well, I mean, this is the. I mean, I guess what the thing is, like, this is the problem with a lot of these new technologies is people develop things and they release it into society, and particularly in American society, it's the wild, wild west. Something new comes along, people adopt it, people are displaced, and we do very little, usually nothing, to mitigate those circumstances and to help people with the transition, or to even try to decide, is this a good thing for our society to have? There was never a vote on globalization. There was never a vote on the digitization of everything. I mean, now there are microwaves and toasters and refrigerators connected to the internet. No, but there was never a vote held. Politicians never had to have their say. These things just happened, and people's lives have been adversely affected. So when you start having conversations about life extension and health extension and all this type of thing that have huge implications, I'm sitting here and saying, this isn't a conversation that we're having that we should be having, because this stuff will be here before we know it.
Right. Well, let's start with this. Okay. Should we put to a vote whether or not we should cure cancer?
Yeah.
No, I mean, like, is that the kind of thing? Is democracy more important than curing cancer?
I mean, I would say in a democratic, well, there's kind of two political schools of thought on that. One we'll call the European model, which says we have scientists and technocrats involved in our government. If they say it's a good idea, then we should do it, and we should make sure that we have the appropriate social supports in place to help people affected by it. That's the European model. The American model is well, yes, we'll let it come along because it'll make our donors a lot of money. And when inevitably there are problems, we'll leave it to charities, NGOs, and others to deal with the mess. And eventually, if it gets too big of a problem, Congress will attempt to ham-fistedly regulate it. And they'll do a shit job of it. Well, that's kind of the American model, is to let it go until it becomes a problem, and then Congress will eventually regulate it somehow. The companies who own it will, of course, write the regulations because our government's owned by corporations. Read my first book about that. And then eventually we'll ham-fistedly regulate it. That's basically how the Western world has decided to deal with these problems.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of things where of course we don't live in a democracy, obviously, right? We live in a representative democracy.
Very technically we're a federal republic, but yes.
Yeah, okay. But it's not, it's that that wasn't the important point. There's just like a side point. Was
no, yes, like,
or that-
we don't have
the important
we
thing.
we don't have national plebiscites in the United States like they do in the UK
Right.
or Australia or things like that. So there's no constitutional apparatus for us to put curing cancer to a vote. But
Right.
should the citizens of a democratic, we'll just use that as a catch-all term for systems of government that are broadly democratic, should citizens in a democratic society get to make decisions about how different things affect their lives? I would say yes.
Well, they should
Is
make the
democracy more important than curing cancer? No. But should the citizens, or at least their representatives, get to have some say in how that's
Yeah.
implemented, who's making
But-
money off of it, how it's going to work? Yes, but we
Nobody's acting, though.
rarely get to do that in our society.
But you've got to.
look at it now. Nobody's acting. That's the problem. Is that these governmental bodies? We can vote on stuff all you want. We could be on a sinking boat trying to vote on what color we're gonna paint the dinghies. Like, this was too late 20 years ago. The planet's fucking in a stage of death. We don't have that kind of time. You know what I mean? And that's scary. Certainly, that we're going to have to go and put some sort of trust, for the sake of mankind, into our better qualities and whatnot. But there's been inaction. So much inaction. We have the institutions to be able to come up with those decisions, but we fucking haven't. And the general public hasn't been interested in even having that conversation. We're making those decisions. So in one aspect, there's this great mass of people that have no concern for any of this sort of thing, that are just chugging along with industry, kind of holding a gun to everybody's head. And I think the scientific community has every right to go and sort of separate themselves from that at some point. I don't think this is a sort of like a tyrannical thing. If there's a tyranny involved in this, it's a tyranny of ignorance on the part of the mass.
Kent?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're killing ourselves. We're fucking killing ourselves.
Okay, let's just say I want to make it so people can see cells and molecules, right? Like,
Right.
I wouldn't, but I would also say, I believe in democracy for a lot of things, but if everyone in the world said Kent should not be able to see cells and molecules, I'd say, fuck you all. I'm going to look at cells and molecules. And I think anybody with any sort of belief in freedom would say, yeah, we're not going to subject that to a vote. Just because probably 90% of Algerians think abortion should be illegal, we believe in a right to choose that, right? And so democracy as a way to make choices for a society doesn't work if people are ignorant and stupid. It's fundamentally flawed if people are idiots. Or have just crazy beliefs.
Public thinks fucking dinosaurs and man interacted. That's alarming.
Right. So I don't want to subject. I want to have the conversation at the level of, at this kind of level, right? But I don't want. It's a lot to unpack. I don't think that giving that democratizing molecular sensing technology, it's definitely or even longevity, when you say that people who work on this sort of stuff haven't thought about the consequences or don't think about the consequences, I think that might be your perception from maybe you haven't talked to enough transhumanists who are working on longevity, because it's if you it's sort of exhaustively what we deal with, thinking about the consequences of doing it and the consequences of not doing it is just our bread and butter. And I don't think it's the kind of thing where, I think if we could have shown people 20 years ago how social media was addicting us to dopamine hits, and making us less happy. Maybe we could have put that to a vote, right? And said, yeah, maybe there's something flawed about the idea of selling people's attention and data to make money and advertise at them, and mining dopamine from billions of people. That might be a bad idea. That might lead to the dystopia that we actually have, that we're actually living in right now.
No, I mean, social media is an excellent example. Mark Zuckerberg wanted to find an easier way to get laid in college. He also is toppling regimes and endangering democracy.
Yeah.
What a transition.
Right. But I also think, like, when Mark Zuckerberg, when he had the thought to do that, I don't think it was coming from a bad place. And I think it's, it's snarky that, he did it to try to get laid, but I think there was some serious vision there. If you read about, especially the early days, he was very big on the idea that social networking would be a vital utility for the world, that this would be a very fundamental good for the world. And I think that in all of that, he just had a complete blind spot about what the business model would need to be and how that would addict people and the dopamine part. I think maybe if
government.
What's that?
Not to mention the involvement of the government, that the social media has basically been used as a tool by the federal government and alphabet agencies to go and literally the greatest surveillance tool ever.
Because we all love it. We're all who's not addicted?
I saw a post the other day that someone posted, and it was a little survey, right? And it's just like, how many times have you been arrested for a DUI and whatnot? And this is an obvious metadata mining thing. And then there's all these comments and stuff, thousands of people commenting, admitting to going and driving drunk, like last week. And I was just like, don't you see that your car insurance is probably going to go up next week after you go and make comments on this sort of thing. And some people thought that was fucking ridiculous. And I was like, well, that kind of shit's already happening.
But I mean, to use that as an example, as you said, Zuckerberg had a really kind of blind spot as to what the business model would need to be to make it work. And I think there was also, I think that we also didn't understand what would happen when a bunch of people with truly demented ideas are able to interact among each other very quickly and easily. If you were a white supremacist back in the 90s, like Timothy McVeigh, you subscribed to Soldier of Fortune, a handful of other magazines. You might have one other buddy or a couple people, or maybe a small militia sort of thing that thought the same thing as you.
Shows.
Yes, yeah, exactly. You hang out at gun shows, all this type of thing. But your ability to find the greater white supremacist community was somewhat limited. However, thanks to the advent of social media, and we've seen the societal implications of this, now all of these groups can get together, form Facebook, talk back and forth, all this type of thing. And now what 20 years ago was an extreme opinion, the federal government used to bomb people in Waco and Ruby Ridge for this sort of thing, has now become a de rigueur part of American politics. And that's the effect of Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, all the rest. That's the effect of social media. So to bring the subject back to the beginning, when we start talking about longevity and anti-aging and all this type of thing, if we don't start having these conversations now, if we don't start thinking about the societal implications now, what government regulations we might need now, we could end up with a very similar situation, but now we're dealing with real human lives and people who are, living far longer. And then we have to decide, well, what are we going to do about all these sort of knock-on effects, all this type of thing? How are the systems of society going to maintain themselves if we tack on 40 years to someone's life? That's the and to your point, Ken, I'm sure that people like you do think about these questions. I say that to say that what concerns me is that when I see these conversations talked about in the mainstream, in erudite publications and all this type of thing, the type of questions I'm pressing you on, this is what I don't see. These questions, I don't see these questions being asked, which is a problem of my industry. We're not doing our job. And I also, on the few times they do get asked, I don't hear great things being elucidated from the people working on it. And I've lived long enough through enough societal changes now to know that's not a great sign. So I'm not criticizing it. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it. I think, broadly speaking, it's probably a good idea, all this sort of thing. But I'm saying there's going to be deleterious societal effects, and we need to start thinking about them now, not later. We need to have the conversation now.
Well, here we are. We're having it.
Yes.
Let's. I think it's a net good. I think it's good to give people knowledge. Information wants to be free. I'll tell you, my highest level objective is self-determination and freedom from suffering for the greatest number of people. And what you're pointing to are most of those questions are questions of meaning that have to do with a very metastable snapshot, a super narrow slice in culture and meaning and history. And if you look at the history of technology going back forever, it's been the same debate, the same issue, the same consequences that may not have been thought out. Whoever invented gunpowder, they should have thought about that some more, right? Whoever invented the wheel, maybe that should have been subject to a vote, because that definitely had, we've never done anything that doesn't have some perverse incentive or use or consequences. Nothing. There's never been a purely good anything, not just technology, but there's never been a purely good food or a purely good subjective experience, and desire is suffering, and it's all simulation anyway. But if it's not, then I'm pretty sure we should do this. That we should free ourselves from this arbitrary thing that 3 billion years of molecular evolution tortures us with, which is our capacity to get sick and die, and that life is a good thing. Life is a good thing. More of it is good. Consciousness is good. We should spread it. We should preserve it. We should increase happiness. And that's the conversation we need to have. I don't even know if it's a conversation more so much as a message, because how can I have that conversation with a random Algerian who thinks that gay people should be thrown off rooftops? That's not a conversation. That's not a conversation. They just need to fucking listen. And, they need to change, because it's bullshit. Right. So we can't have a conversation with retards. We can't have a conversation with religious fanatics who believe crazy things. It's not a conversation. It's just, you with your ex stuck in a box, and you have to have a conversation about the future of humanity. It's not going to work. So I don't know if it's a conversation. It's a conversation we need to have at some level, but it's also leadership, and it's change. And in 2024, at some point, we need some kind of goddamn national figures who are talking meaningfully about the transhumanist agenda, even if they don't call it that, because it's a terrible term. It's transhumanist. There's not a better thing to call it, but it's a fucking awful. It's awful branding. It should be something else. We called it H+. But it's really if you drive a car, you're a transhumanist. If you wear glasses, you're a transhumanist. If you're not, the only non-transhumanists are Unabombers and ISIS, and even ISIS are more transhumanist than the Unabomber. So, we have to deal with the fact that it's obviously a material universe, that it's possible to hack biology. It's possible to develop probably possible to develop super intelligent, artificially general intelligence systems. We have to deal with that. We have to deal with that possibility realistically. And when you bring up concerns like who is going to have a job, that those are rooted in capitalist systems. I think capitalism is. I think the economic political theory is almost irrelevant here. Like, this is one of the few perspectives that could actually pop the bubble that never pops, which is money. Like, one of the few things that could really destroy money is material is the end of material and energy scarcity.
God, it's so crazy. It's so hard to do away with money too. It's like the fucking Santa Claus. It's imaginary.
Well, yeah, but if everyone could serve their own needs and we're not limited by energy and material scarcity, then money could just be monopoly money. Money could just be for fun. Money could just be for a game and never a matter of life and death and serving basic needs. So I'm all for automated luxury communism. But again, like I think we're somewhat fucked if we don't have a sense of humankind as some kind of collective family. I am a bit of a collectivist just because I think it's too dangerous. Like, it is too dangerous not to have a coherent concept of the broader 7 billion person human family. Like, I think we need that. We need things to unite us. So it's important that we have conversation, but it's also like, I don't know how to have conversation. I don't know. I don't want most of the people on Earth to be in that conversation, because even though I respect the Algerian who thinks gay. I can respect that person on a fundamental human level, even if they believe in same things, but they're not going to contribute anything to these conversations. You can contribute to these conversations because you're a highly educated person and you think with some rationality, right? And you're able to reason, you don't have a space god telling you what to do based on some old book, right? Telling you to stone women who've had abortions, for instance. But maybe it's like this. This might be the correct framing. Sometimes you just got to be the adult in the room. And sometimes that applies on a global scale. And in my case, I have a vision that I often feel alone in. We need molecular sensing at utility scale for so many reasons. And that the way that goes south, the ways that goes, I can think of so many ways that goes north, and the ways that goes south are very obscure to me. Why would it be?
But I think that's what we have to. I think that's the rub. And AI is an excellent example. I've spent a lot of time thinking about the potentialities of AI and superintelligence and all this type of thing. Like I said, read Nick Bostrom book about it. You had Eliezer on Facebook. He and I have spoken. As I said, I used to hang out in the Less Wrong community. All this type of thing. And that's a gray swan, not even a black swan. That's a gray swan. We kind of know it's coming. We already are beginning to see the effects of it with ever more intelligent algorithms that affect ever greater parts of our lives. All this type of thing. And that is something that, again, I was talking to this guy, we were talking about 3D printing and distributed manufacturing. Society is not ready for that. Society certainly is not ready for what happens when AI starts to really begin to affect everyday life. And it will certainly do so by the end of the decade. If anything, the pandemic has fast forwarded that conversation. And the problem is we just don't. society is changing in so many dramatic ways that as much as, yes, money is a construct that we created, therefore we can get rid of it. Yes, our economic system is not great. I wrote a whole book blasting our economic system. And there'll be another edition of it next year. I've spilled a lot of digital ink writing about my problems with, capitalism as such and all this type of thing. But these systems are going to still be very much in place by the time people like yourself finish the technologies that you're working on. So I think whether we like it or not, or whether we agree with it or not, we have to think in those terms, because it is going to be, quite honestly, much easier to accomplish what you're going to accomplish than it is to change the entire world economy. Now, changing the entire world economy is not impossible. We've done it twice in the last 300 years. But it is a very slow process. And when we start having these conversations about the potentialities of these technologies, it's going to change the world so much, and it's going to have so many radical effects that it's like, yes, if people are living longer, wouldn't it be nice if they could take care of their own needs and not rely on our present economic system for survival? I couldn't agree with you more. That would be wonderful. Absolutely. But the chances of us changing the whole political system before you get done doing what you're going to do is pretty slim. We have every incentive to change it right now, and we're going nowhere fast. So I feel like it's productive to think about these things in the context of our present system, because whether we like it or not, it's still going to be in place.
Right.
And therefore we have to talk about what the present system looks like in the context of this new technology.
Right.
If I could make a point, there's also the fact that we may not have that kind of time because there are problems that are very pressing, just as far as like the survival of our species. I think it's inevitable that due to climate change, there are going to be a lot of fucking people dying. And that's unavoidable. I can definitely see that there's value in extending human life, because we don't know what's coming down the road when all these changes happen. When the permafrost and all that sort of stuff starts thawing, and all these ancient viruses start coming out, when there's rotting bodies all over the place. If we go by historic models and whatnot, usually what's happened has not been very nice. There's been mass die-offs before. So, and then there's the added aspect to this too, that this isn't just like the Black Plague or whatever. We're also dealing with forever chemicals, rising ocean levels, political unrest, all those sort of things. And I can definitely understand too where you're coming from too, Cameron, in that what would it look like if ISIS got really into CRISPR? You know what I mean? And I would really hope that doesn't happen. But
yeah. I mean, if ISIS really got into CRISPR,
yeah, dude, that would be fucked.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we're really going to need what I'm building now. So,
right,
yeah,
but that's an example of. But here's the thing: ISIS could get into that because they have a lot of very wealthy sheikhs in the Middle East who are more than happy to throw oil money at such pedantic problems in order to gain an edge over the West. You can convince some Qatari billionaire to finance that. I mean, if somebody had that thought in a cave wherever they live, and went to the Qataris and said, "We need $1 billion to figure out how to do this,"
but we can't go like, "Not a problem.
We'll build you a lab."
Let me scare you a lot more than that. Okay, like all ISIS would need to do is kidnap me or any of like a few. There are probably like 10,000 people like me that ISIS could kidnap and provide a lab to and kill millions of people. Seriously. Like, I'm no big deal. I'm on an FBI watch list. Like, this isn't, I should be on an FBI watch list. and I know for a fact that I'm on an FBI watch list. I'm not saying this to be dramatic. I'm saying this that everybody in synthetic biology is in some database, and they should be, because nuclear weapons, like the number of people who are actually competent to build a nuclear bomb, like soup to nuts, is extremely small. But the number of people who understand enough about synthetic biology to do something, to make something that would be way worse than COVID, there are thousands of us. And that should be scary. And it's going to happen. And it's certainly not going to be me. I mean, because even if they kidnapped me, I would, I would rather die than do that. I would resist them, and they'd have to kill me. And hopefully but that just has to not be true for like one person with my creativity and insight into synthetic biology. That just has to be true for one person like that, or one person like that to have a bad day. Right.
No, I mean, all you need is one rogue actor. I mean, we had that problem with nuclear material coming out of the Soviet Union after the fall in the 90s.
Right.
There was a lot of energy spent by CIA, NSA, and other agencies in the early 90s keeping track of Soviet nuclear material. And
they didn't do a very good job of lighthouses, though.
No, they did not do a very good job, and we didn't catch all of it. There's probably about 5 tons of weapons grade fissionable material out in the world, and we don't really know where it is.
Wow, that's a lot of dirty bombs.
Missing, and I think we have 2 broken arrows right now, don't we?
Yeah, this is more common than I think people realize. In terms of like, if you are, my master's degree is in diplomacy with an emphasis in terrorism and asymmetrical warfare. Longtime listeners already know this. And so I spent a lot of time studying like how a dirty bomb comes to be. And you're right, when it comes to like a stolen warhead, we don't care. Why? Because they don't have the targeting system. They don't have the launching system. A warhead by itself is not valuable. It's the fissionable material inside that is. Therein is where you begin the problem. They also don't have shielding, and you can see the radiation from space. So it's, relatively speaking, somewhat easy to find. However, and making a dirty bomb is actually more difficult than you would believe, because that you have to spread that material over a wide area in order to get enough gamma and alpha radiation to actually affect people, all this type of thing. Terrorism is more complicated than people think or realize, which is why it doesn't happen very often. And when it does, it's news. Yes, I mean, that's, and I get all of that. Yes, the number of people is very limited. And I understand the kind of the thought scenario of, what if somebody, wants to do that sort of thing and, creates a virus far more deadly than COVID and all this sort of thing. I get all of that. But to me, that's also why I think we as a society now need to take a very particular interest in this. And I'm not just talking somebody in some government basement in the Pentagon. Right. Who spends their days thinking up every possible scenario in which the world could end. I'm saying we, as a society, as the vox populi, the common people, need to take an interest in this, because it's going to radically affect our lives much sooner than people realize.
Yeah. Is anybody even... One thing I've noticed that nobody's really talking about, too, is the accumulation of prions in soils and whatnot in the environment, that they're not going away, and there's more and more of them piling up. They've actually done studies now that prions can go and transfer from dead animal tissue directly into plant tissue, survive the prion, the misfolded proteins survive that process, and can actually go and start prion fires in animals that eat that grass, or people that eat those animals. Someone could go and find a industrial manufacturing process, or just get a whole lot of animals with chronic wasting disease in a facility out in the middle of the desert or something like that.
Oh, stop. You got to stop. You're too creative.
This is like why in Colorado, when the elk herd in Estes Park had chronic wasting disease, they sent every hunter they could find out there to kill them all and destroy it all. But again, this is why, to return to the central point, when it comes to aging, longevity, all this type of thing, like we need to be having these societal conversations now. Otherwise, we're going to get caught with our pants down again.
Yeah, privacy is a problem. I think Kent's device could actually have a real positive impact on coming up with some of the solutions for those things, because those proteins are they just do not want to degrade.
Okay, so there are solutions to all of that, but that's why I'm doing this. This isn't a conversation that needs to happen. This is like one tech visionary asserting himself, saying, I don't hear anyone else in biotech but me, unfortunately, saying we need solid state molecular sensing at utility scale or we are fucked. That's why I'm working on this. It's starting out the way it's starting because not only do we need to get it out there and develop it, but we need these people who are going to be player scientists to actually become scientists. We need 10 times as many people to know what a prion is, to think about these things, to have expert level knowledge. Expert level knowledge in computer science was esoteric and rare in the 1980s, and now there's coders. You'll find somebody with professional coding skills on your street. If you live in a random street, though, in America, there's probably not someone on your block who works with CRISPR or knows what it is beyond the headlines. I want to change that. I want us to have 10 times as many people who just have the knowledge and the skills and the insights. Right now, 1 out of 5 Americans think the vaccine includes microchips, and that they're being tracked, and somehow it has to do with 5G. Well, if people actually thought about and knew about the details of the molecular biology of vaccines, if the average person knew what the central dogma was, like the most fundamental thing in molecular biology that everyone should know, that I think should be like the ABCs. It should be like knowing that the earth is round. Everybody should know the central dogma of molecular biology, the DNA to RNA to protein. Everyone should have at least that base level of knowledge. 5-year-olds should be taught that.
Yeah.
And we're not in that world yet.
No,
and
go look at the comments about the vaccine on Reddit.
Yeah.
Oh God.
There's a lot of idiots out there.
So vaccines and microchips. There's a lot of so one way to combat misinformation is to give people access to direct access to undeniable knowledge, like actually letting them see the truth with their own eyes rather than what's transmitted through social networks, rather than what's transmitted through the web of a million lies. And one thing, Molecular Reality Corporation, which is the name of the company, I'll drop that again, Google it. For all of your listeners should go Google Molecular Reality Corporation if they want to help me out making this happen. Little bit of self promotion there. Is to get to that point where the access to what is actually going on is there with cheap, simple, easy to use things. Like whatever misinformation is out there, whatever people misunderstand, whether it's about prions, whether it's about any of those scenarios where ISIS gets CRISPR, if we have a critical mass of solid state molecular sensors, it's going to be incredibly hard to have any kind of spread of biological agents designed to kill people. And that's simply because the reason that this 120 nanometer blob has killed millions of people in the last year and a half is that we can't see it. Like if SARS-CoV-2 were like the size of a baseball and they were just like floating around and you could just like keep them from punching you in the face, we could just go around shooting them, or we could hit them with baseball bats, but they're too small to see. And so this little invisible monster has killed millions of people because we can't see it. and the tools to see it, like the tools to actually know where it is and how much of it is there. Like, I mean, they're known to people in the field, and they're not that difficult to use, but they're definitely not super easy to use. They're not as easy to use as a toy. They're not everywhere. And I want to make them that way. I want to make like seeing that level of reality as easy as running water, electricity, internet, utilities, easy to use things. And I want, that is my calling. And I think that I think that needs to happen. I think it has to happen. Society can decide maybe society will decide whether it wants to cure aging. Maybe society will decide cancer is great. Let people keep dying of it. Those are horrible things, but society maybe will decide that. But I think society pretty much doesn't want pandemics. I think we all agree to that. Doesn't want bioterrorism to thrive.
Right.
And this kind of tool out in the world is going to is with a critical mass of sensors like this that are controlled by people who understand how to use them, so that there's not some bigger power exploiting them. And just like right now, you get any kind of medical procedure, you sign away the rights to anything they take out of your body, all the data, all the molecules, all the DNA they can see. They can do whatever they want to with it. They can profit off of it. They can do research on it, which is great, but they can also profit on it. They can own it. I have a close friend fighting cancer, who's had biopsies taken out of him so he could be in a clinical trial. And I can't get the company to give me the data, even though I'm his caregiver and I'm responsible, and I'm a scientist, and I'm trying to figure out things about his cancer. I can't get the company to respond to my emails. They have his data. I don't have an easy way to get all that data here because I know how to use the tools. Right now, I don't have access to a big lab. Working with an engineering team, a small engineering team, building these things, but this needs to get to where this quote unquote toy that we're building, it is the basis for the much easier thing. And it's going to start out as something you just spit in, you pour reagents into, you go in your backyard, you grab some soil, you filter it, you put that into the device. You're going to start seeing those things, those industrial pollutants, new microorganisms in your backyard, things you might not know are in your celery. We can go on and on and on and fill 1,500 pages with like this level of reality that I want to give people this new sense. I want to give them portals to it. I want it to enter the culture that we are more than we can see, and actually give people the ability to see it. I just hope that's enough of an inspiring message to get your listeners to go to molecularreality.com and help us out making this happen.
I do. Oh, yes, Woody.
Another thing to point out, I think is important. A lot of people have distrust of the sciences and whatnot, or think that people, like the point you were trying to make about a lot of people don't think about some of the outcomes of their actions. This project that Kent's undertaking, I'm sure it has occurred to him that there could be a possibility at some point that there would be repercussions or backlash from certain industries against him for doing this, that this is a sort of a dangerous thing. I'm sure that's occurred to him. And it seems that he is willing to take that gambit for the betterment of everybody else. And I think that's a point that needs to be made is that when you go and try to do away with things like cancer and aging, those problems have billions and billions of dollars of products and infrastructure and services and behind them. And when there's that much money behind things, it's really easy for bad things to happen to people. You know what I mean? So I trust Kent's where he's coming from at this.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like like when I'm not meaning to be dramatic, but like
Yeah.
like Martin Luther King knew the price of what he was doing, that was an
Yeah.
inevitability. But the
I
greater
think,
good,
yeah.
you know what I mean? That outweighed the potentiality. So I don't have any misgivings or like I don't wonder about his motives on this. I guess is the best way to put it.
I have a big advantage over MLK and Gandhi. Is that I'm not fighting power structures. I'm fighting a thing that kills and tortures even the worst people. Like even people who are just like all about money and power still die of cancer, are still
Right.
threatened by it. Like it is truly a common enemy. It is like everybody's enemy. So like,
well, they say the shoemakers kids that go barefoot, but I think in a way you kind of are, because even like identifying environmental pollutants, doing away with disease, there's a lot of force behind all the money that goes into those industries. So in a way you actually kind of are fighting power structures, because how much money's tied up in that in those whole things.
Yeah, I think synthetic biology in general is going to supplant industrial chemical production. I think some of the forever chemicals that are out there, things that we just should never release into the environment, there are ways to remediate them. There are ways to get rid of them. They're not really forever. I actually worked on. I worked on aging in the lab of the guy who pioneered environmental bioremediation, who developed techniques to get microorganisms to eat some of those chemicals at polluted sites. And we took those same, we used those same techniques to find enzymes that could break down bad chemicals that accumulate in the body as we age. So, I mean, it's all near and dear to me. We've got to restore the wild, natural environment, get rid of all that crap. I don't think the evil, quote unquote, evil interests that are aligned with not letting industrial pollutants be known about. I mean, if Aaron Brockovich didn't get shot, I think I don't think that someone who's, well, I'll tell you what, I live in Richmond, California. There are all these like weird refinery kind of things going on, all these cancer clusters, all these sketchy industrial pollutant situations. Yeah. I think it'd be really good if the people within 20 miles of me could easily actually quantify all that stuff and see it. I think they would organize. I think they would like dramatically organize if suddenly every household in a 20-mile radius could see all the chemicals around them. Like that would be revolutionary. Would I get killed for doing it? Would I get killed for enabling them to do that? I could just get killed for looking at someone the wrong way. Like I'm not sure the people who have profit motives in poisoning the environment and like, dumping toxic chemicals where poor people live. I feel like you could co-opt those people with other profit motives that are less asshole-ish, I hope. And that I don't know how many people's fortunes that they're, going to have me taken out because I'm giving people the ability to see these industrial pollutants are tied to any given industrial pollutant. I think we could just say like, okay, whatever company it is that produces these nasty things that are in the environment, there are green alternatives. There are things that do break down. There are transitions to those. There's a reasonable amount of force to get legislation to do something about that. And it's all urgent. It needs to be done. But sure, they're evil sociopathic bastards for sure who are profiting off of that. But I also think those evil sociopathic bastards are smart enough to see that there are other ways to be, greedy. There's smarter ways to be greedy.
Yeah, they can be incentivized to be better actors.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can incentivize people to do the right thing for purely selfish reasons if you do it right. I hope.
Well, I think when it comes to industrial waste, that was a topic I definitely wanted to talk about, and so we should do so now. I don't think people understand the pervasiveness of dangerous industrial chemicals throughout the world, everywhere, really.
Yeah.
And while a lot of and even obviously these things became very prescient in the 70s with things like Love Canal and the annual burning of the Cuyahoga River, which led to the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and all this type of thing. And there were lots of people in the environmental movement at the time who did very heroic things at getting that into the popular consciousness. But I don't think people understand how much of it is really all over.
Yep.
And so empowering people to be able to look at that within their own habitat, their own environment, seems rather revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they already, to be clear, they already can to some extent. They've just got to go seek out the knowledge. They've got to change their behavior. And I'm ultimately trying to provide a good for them, the power for them that doesn't require that lets them be as lazy as they want to be. One way to do that is games. Like the game for looking at these sort of things is called Raindrop Planet. And it's sort of like molecular Pokemon Go, combined with some other sort of neat accessories we're going to throw into it. But it involves actually going out and hunting for molecules in your environment and doing other things with microorganisms in a model culture system that you actually keep in your house, like a little Tamagotchi. So maybe it's more like a blend of Tamagotchi and molecular Pokemon Go. Making it purely fun, that's a big part of this. Like a lot of citizen science is activating the goody two shoes gene. Is like a lot of citizen science calls people out to do something because it's right. It's good for the planet. I think that's great. I think you get 10 times as many people, though, if you have something sexy and fun that also serves the same need. And that's why I don't even call our early customers citizen scientists. I call them player scientists because I want to appeal to that human desire to have fun. And science is incredibly fun, but really professional science is it's fun in a different way. It's like it's not as fun, quote unquote, as a video game because it's too fucking hard. It's arduous. I mean, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's utterly compelling if you're drawn to be a professional scientist. But as any professional scientists know, it's a lot of hard, boring work and suffering and a lot of disappointment. Anybody, especially any experimentalist, the vast majority of their career is boring, assiduous struggle. And maybe if they're lucky, a few times a decade, some wonderful thing that gives them insight. And that's all fed because people who go into that, people who go into these fields, they're motivated by a childlike sense of wonder for the actual subject matter. So, they're willing to suffer sitting at a lab bench doing boring experiments day after day, month after month, because of that love and that sense of wonder and curiosity that's deep inside them. But like most people, like that requires years of study. It requires a certain mentality. It requires a highly patient intellectual absorption in the subject matter. And here we are in this world that's hyper distracted and addicted to dopamine hits thanks to social media. And maybe we're losing the ability to do that, but we can still teach, and people still have a sense of wonder. There are more people with enough sense of wonder to do science than there are people with the expertise to do science. But
Absolutely.
If all you needed was a sense of, if we could turn everyone who just has the sense of wonder into a functioning unit in the army of science, we'd have 100 times as many scientists. And we might actually solve some of these major problems, not just through policy, but through actually solving them physically. And one of those things would be forever chemicals. Like all that shit out in the environment that shouldn't be there, that's bad for you. Like one solution is to figure out things that are not forever chemicals that just biodegrade, that can destroy the forever chemicals. That's one approach. And that involves enzyme engineering, chemical engineering, etc. But there are ways to do that. There are ways to remediate the environment and get all that shit out of it. And we have to clean it up.
Or even doing sampling of bacteria, discovering new bacteria that can eat things like metals. There's so many organisms in the environment that, because of the limited workforce, basically, of people that can go and do that sampling, if there's more people there, then you're going to discover more stuff. And yeah, absolutely. The value is just, it's a kind of at times a hard concept to wrap our head around, how much stuff how many different fields they could benefit from this. You know what I mean? So one question I had was, what kind of so with the attention span of most people kind of being short and whatnot, how are you going to kind of like construct these little cookies? You know what I mean?
You mean the games?
Yeah. So so a lot of like you were saying, there's a whole ton of people that are interested in science, but they don't have the background, like myself or whatever, but they want to go and, do little experiments and stuff like that. If you go and look at YouTube, for example, there's all kinds of videos and whatnot on, small experiments that you can do, stuff like melting, growing bismuth crystals, all kinds of stuff, home double slit experiments, all that sort of thing. How, and those things are great and they're really popular because the average person can go and do that. So it's you get that little dopamine hit. So how are you going to package these little cookies in the game?
What do you mean by cookies?
I think what he's asking about the gamification in terms of, if people go out and do this, are there prizes? Do they win anything? Is there competition? Is there like a leaderboard for most molecules analyzed or something?
Yeah. So we're taking on not just being a biotech startup, but we're going to become a full gaming studio. And right now we're not in a position right now to spend $100 million developing a single title, but we will be. And right now, starting out, the games we've demoed and played around with are very primitive. They're very simple starting out. The first thing that we actually built, we've built two demos. One of them is called Spike Hunter, which is a pun on Spy Hunter, and it just involves looking for translocation spikes from cells and molecules. The other one is we're not going to call it SARS invaders, but it's sort of like space invaders, except the aliens are created by translocation spikes. By which I mean you're measuring this electrical current, and when cells and molecules interrupt that current, they produce a spike, and the information about the cell and molecule is within that spike. At a very simple level, playing that game, the dopamine hit is going to be, you're going to have all these combinations of reagents that you put into the instrument, and you don't know what's going to happen. But those different combinations of reagents and the things getting measured are going to surprise you. And they're going to show you new and different types of monsters and aliens that attack you in different kind of simple 80s style, arcade style video games. We're starting with that because those are the easiest things to make without hundreds of millions of dollars for a full-fledged gaming studio. But those, like, for those will be simple kinetic fun. But on top of that is just how it's just the novelty of it. You're generating the gaming experience with these mysterious liquids that you're putting into the console. And that's very early. Those are the alpha games. Those are the first games we're going to be playing with groups of the first customers. And what that does is that is just all the early substantial method and protocol work related to how nanopore sensors work themselves. So we have to bootstrap this from something that's about iterating on the basic nanopore technology until we're able to do very definitive cataloging and identification of different molecules. There's a lot of work that remains to be done on that. And we're going to have a lot of advantages simply through scale, the scale of people literally playing with nanopores inside of these simple to use cartridges that you pop in and out of the console. So that itself is a dopamine hit to the extent that an 80s video game can be fun to play, but add in the novelty and sense of wonder of the fact that the game is being generated by cells and molecules.
Nice.
Further down the road, it becomes a lot more immersive, a lot more complex. The players learn a lot more about science, and then they actually start to solve problems in complex experimental protocols and environmental sampling, etc., by how well they do in the game. And at a certain point, the line blurs between the players who are learning the science and the professionals who are already scientists, trained professional scientists who are basically the developers. And they meet in the middle at some point. And these people who in the next few years will just be playing video games, in 5 years, it's going to be a hobby that's a big part of their lives, and it's going to bring them along into professional level expertise and knowledge of biology, of molecular and cellular biology. And yeah, if we can just get 2 billion people on Earth play video games. We don't in the video game phase, and to be clear, the video game phase is the first 3 or 4 years. Because in 10 years, we just want solid state molecular sensors that you take for granted everywhere, that if you want them in your house. But the video game phase, we don't need to sell hundreds of millions of consoles to be insanely successful in the video game phase. We need 1 in 1,000 of the people on the planet who play video games to play molecular games. And that'll give us a massive increase in the number of people who are able to do these things. Like the number of people on Earth who meaningfully are working with looking at cells and molecules on a daily basis, we would probably triple or quadruple that number just with that cohort of players. So We don't need to have Sony PlayStation sales numbers to be insanely successful in this as a scientific endeavor. And then beyond that, the second generation is just the molecular PC, and it's a much faster, more powerful instrument, one that will be able to bootstrap and build with the early video game consoles. And it's the thing that will actually do FDA approvable diagnostics. It's the thing that will actually be the workhorse of establishing molecular sensing at utility scale. So it's a decade-long endeavor. By the way, Cameron, I'd love to hear about or know the name of the guy you said was obsessed with building those underground cities on the moon. Love to talk to him sometime and see what happened with him.
Yeah, I haven't heard from him in a little bit. His website is called the Luna Project.
Okay.
And there was a good documentary on Amazon years ago in which he was featured. They were talking about, the future of human space travel and all this type of thing. And that's how I found out about him. And I contacted him, and he was, and he was amenable to having a chat, and we did so, and it was very interesting. It's as far as I know, he's still trying to get to the moon. That's kind of his whole shtick. Like, he wants to just live on the moon, and that's kind of his whole thing.
Could you play the Sesame Street song "Someday Little Children" in this part of the podcast? Just edit it in at this point. Have you heard that song?
Yes, that's licensed music.
Can I go? Someday, little children, and it won't be long. We're gonna. What is it? We're gonna cure all diseases, and we'll be living on the moon.
Yeah, I mean.
Anyway, it's
yeah.
That was basically that Sesame Street song is the greatest expression of transhumanism ever created musically.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I think all of this is compelling. Be just like the numbers you cited about how comparatively few people you need to start radically expanding all of this sort of thing. I think that's amazing. That it a few thousand people could radically change science forever. Do you think citizen science like this is the future?
Well, I'd like to live in a world where, like, almost everybody is it okay? So it's been really interesting to be a biotech person during the pandemic, and you could talk about this with, like, basically like a month into the pandemic, every friend of mine, almost every single person I know in biotech, had stopped what they were doing and they were doing something about the virus. Like, it was ridiculous. Even my own work, it became about the virus. Like, it's not that I stopped what I was doing, but what I was doing was good for trying to detect the virus anyway. So we just focused on that. Right. I'd like to live in a world where like the average person has, I want to live in a world where, like, our mainstream discourse, I'll put it this way. You've heard the saying, like, the way some people define class. Low class people talk about people. Middle class people, you've heard, I forget how it goes, but it ends with high class, upper class people. This is like inverting the idea that class is about money. The highest class of people talk about ideas. And I want to live in a world where people talk about ideas, and we're like something like, let's take Theranos, for instance, like the whole Theranos thing. There's this thing called Theranos derangement syndrome. So since I'm working on a technology that detects things related to biomedicine, like, I've had literally hundreds of people ask me if this is the next Theranos. And I'm not alone. Everyone who's working in this field on any kind of diagnostic technology gets asked that question. And that's because everybody knows about Theranos. And the reason that everybody knows about Theranos, it was such a dramatic story. There was sex, there's weirdness, there's fraud, there's like $1 billion involved. But like, from my perspective, I see all of that human drama and I'm like, watch the HBO documentary, read the book, I know people who worked there. I've talked to people who were in the documentary. Like, this is my world, right? In the mainstream, it's all about the sex. It's all about the sex and the fraud and is Elizabeth Holmes a sociopath and all that, right? But nobody asks the important question, why didn't it fucking work? Nobody really asks that question. Nobody thinks about that question. Like, nowhere
well, to be very honest with you, we don't care.
Yeah.
To be very blunt with you, we literally don't care. Like, I mean, if it had worked, it would have been a huge breakthrough and everyone would have been like, oh yeah, great. But it failed. The story of the failure and the things around it, far more compelling than why the technology didn't work. People don't understand it, and what they don't understand, they therefore do not care. But everybody understands sex. So that makes for much more compelling reading.
Exactly. So everybody understands sex and fraud and they get excited about that. But there's this way more important thing, which is, wouldn't it be great if we could do all lab diagnostics from a drop of blood? And like, where's the documentary that's just all about how difficult that is and how we might actually be able to do that? Like, nobody's going to watch that because where's the sex? Where's the fraud? Where's the weirdo with the big eyes and the turtleneck? Right.
I mean, again, people don't care about that sort of thing. Like, when you go in for a blood draw, they take some blood, you get your blood panels back. You certainly don't read that data. It's incredibly esoteric. It's explained to you by your doctor, all this type of thing. And you go on from there. People just don't care about this sort of thing. Nor do I think they ever, because nobody's ever going to care. Like, just nobody's ever going to.
Okay, I want to live in a world where people would care. Like, I that's a little more high-minded, right? And I understand that it's not that I'm not going to change human nature, but we could make molecular reality literally a lot more exciting and sexy and interesting itself. We can make it compelling. We can make it dramatic. We can make it beautiful. And then people would pay attention. Because there's drama in why you couldn't get diagnostics accurately from a drop of blood. There's wonder, there's fascination there. It's just that we can't even start having that conversation without like PhDs. And like, I want to change that, but also when it comes to that question of diagnostics, what we're building, you'll never get a blood draw again. Like, you should literally never have to worry or think about it, because you're going to have the privacy settings in your toilet molecular sensor, in your bathtub drain, in your air handling system. You're going to be controlling all of that data, looking at those biomarkers, sharing them with large scale projects if you want, keeping it to yourself if you want, sharing that information with your doctor. And one of the consequences of that is that, just take cancer as an example. Detection is key. Early detection is key.
Yep.
And mostly you can get several years of warning from your piss for just about every type of cancer. You can get several years of warning for most diseases like that. You can see them coming. And you could do something about it. And that alone justifies what we're working on. So it's, I
mean, yes, it seems like that should already be, well in place. But then again, I look at that and I look at the social side and say, in order for that to be effective, And in order for
Mhm.
that to work well and all this type of thing, we have to fix the American healthcare system. And you see how well that's been going.
Well,
It
okay,
has.
so yeah, like my life is like I said, I'm caregiving for a cancer patient right now, and I've never seen the healthcare system up close and so deeply. It's never been such a pervasive part of my life, and
Oh, it's
that's
a disaster.
yeah. But I mean, it's a disaster that involves the most saint-like, dedicated, beautiful people I've ever known, i.e., most nurses.
Yeah.
Doctors who are incredibly dedicated and knowledgeable. Some of them are crappy, but for the most part, the problem with the system is not the people, it's the system.
Yes.
And I truly believe that, like, the idea that I want to put them all out of a job is something they would welcome. Like, if we can completely understand biology at a fundamental level, model it like a complex information system, get to the bottom of all of its complexities, develop radically effective therapeutic interventions that are tailored to individuals, then hospitals are just going to be there for trauma and psychiatry, because, you know, we're not necessarily going to address the problems of the soul, and not everybody wants to regard their, I mean, for me, I don't want to take psychiatric drugs if I have a problem. I want to try to understand myself existentially. So that's one kind of disease that I think we have to back off and consider the meaning around, rather than just curing it with some pharmaceutical intervention that brings
Right, but I also, I mean,
existential
when you
problems.
start, right, but when you start thinking about, like, oh, you know, having, you know, sensors in your home to catch these things in advance and all this type of thing, if we don't put the insurance companies out to pasture, they are going to harvest that data like an Iowa corn farmer, and they're going to figure out some way to make money off of it, because they stay up much later at night than the rest of us do, figuring out how to make money off of this stuff. And therein begins the problem. Like, therein begins the problem.
Well, let them. It's fine. I mean, we'll put them out of business, because, I mean, I don't know. Insurance companies shouldn't exist at some point. In my transhumanist utopian vision of the future, insurance companies become absurd. And if that gets me killed by some insurance company tycoon, then I don't know the answer to that. But yeah, I mean, insurance companies, you know, we've already passed the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act, thank God, right?
Right.
And that was actually, I think that's one of the very few things, honestly. Just I don't know the details. I'm sure there's some cynic who'd listen to this and say, oh, that legislation is crap. But just the fact that the Congress, our Congress passed that legislation, I think it's been several years now, now that I think about it, that's like the most impressive thing I can think of, that they actually had the vision and foresight to pass the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act. Yeah, holy shit, that just occurred to me. Isn't that awesome? Like,
well, I mean, part of the reason why you got the Genetic Non-Discrimination Act is because the insurance companies were already planning on doing massive genetic testing and charging people more if they had the wrong genes for things. And fortunately, there was some great people like Kirsten Gillibrand and others who, you know, found out about this and took action to stop it. You know, I mean, yes, I mean, that is, you know, that's one example of, you know, the government actually thinking ahead. It very rarely happens. Yes, I mean, but even so, I mean, yes, I mean, insurance companies shouldn't exist, but here's the thing. At the rate we're going with universal healthcare in this country, you'll have a toilet sensor analyzing our shit before we manage to get rid of the insurance companies. And what I fear out of all this technology is we're going to end up with the medical version of Facebook, where there's going to be
yeah.
all this data and it's going to be bought and sold like pork bellies in Chicago.
Yeah.
For various and sundry things and people and all this sort of thing. And it's going to become, that data is going to become its own industry, because that's what's happening in almost every other sector of life.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that would be terrible and dystopian. And we should not do this technology at all if that would happen. But here's the thing, is that you're considering the movement of that cog in the technology wheel without considering the other ones. The premise behind this sort of population scale longitudinal sensing is that we actually develop effective medicine.
Yeah.
Like the whole argument about insurance and the broken healthcare system is mooted if we know how to cure all diseases, or at least most of them. Like if we actually have a radically effective way to prevent or cure most disease conditions, then all of these arguments about the healthcare system are mooted. Agreed? To some extent?
Not necessarily, because then you get into cost, availability, and access, which is the problem we have now.
And that's also a synthetic biology thing. That's where we get into other parts of the very complex machinery of technological progress moving together. One of my partner, or one of my fellow cohort YC startups was Osh's Affordable Pharmaceuticals. This guy like trying to figure out, how do you give ordinary people the ability to get super cheap pharmaceuticals? Even beyond that, there are more like radical people who are like, well, how can you make any drug? And that'll come along too. Like availability of those therapies. The person I'm caregiving for, it's about $2 million in medical treatment. Thank God for insurance in the past 2 years. About $2 million in billing. Amazing, right? Like, it's thank God for insurance companies. Ironically, right? There's no way we were going to find $2 million for treatments, but he just happened to have insurance when he got cancer.
Yes, we also could have implemented a universal system 10 years ago, and it wouldn't have had to worry about the cost at all.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. In a sane world, right?
Yes.
So,
and by sane, I mean literally almost every other OECD country, but you know.
Right. So, I mean, those are other parts of the technology cog. The technology cog. When you think about, one thing you also have to do. Okay, so social media has to change. Like that, it's clearly not good for us on a meaning level, on a spiritual level, on a psychological level. It has to change into something better for people. It must. It really, really, really sucks what it does to our brains. No doubt about it.
Yeah, we have a narcissism epidemic going on.
Yeah. I mean, we got millions of podcasts. Millions of podcasts. Who's listening to them?
Well, I mean, yes. Anytime you take something and you democratize it, you get, and you make it easy to do, you end up getting a lot more of it. You get a lot more supply of it. Demand does not always necessarily come up to meet that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We've certainly seen that in book publishing. We democratize book publishing, volume has gone up, and quality has plummeted.
Right. I mean,
it makes you miss the days of the big five publishers. I mean, sometimes. I mean, considering what goes out into the world, it really makes you miss the big publishing days.
Yeah. When you could dream of the great American novel. Yep. Books. I remember books. I remember, hours of absorbed contemplation in the written word. I sure miss that. Anyway.
Yes, now it's hours of surface contemplation about tweets.
Yeah. Our minds being torn apart by 100 little dumb distractions all day long. Yeah, totally.
Well, I mean, it's. I've always said, when it comes to those sorts of technologies, I have a tortured relationship because, on the one hand, they have made my career possible, but conversely, they've also made it very difficult to get paid for what I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And in another world, I might have never been. I might have never gotten the following that I have, but if I got a breakout chance to do something or publish something, I would have been paid for it. And I could have taken that one thing and turned it into 50 other jobs. And now we're stuck with a wonky advertising subscription model that honestly only a handful of people really make any money off of. I don't think that's what's going to happen in this situation. But I mean, yes, I can see how your technology is great news for people at Pfizer and Moderna and AstraZeneca and Eli Lilly and, Johnson & Johnson and all these large companies to whom we've had to be very nice to over the last year because of COVID and all this sort of thing. It seems like I get your vision. I understand your vision. I appreciate it probably more than most people. And I think it's a very interesting and exciting world that we're launching into, because we have all of these new world-changing technologies that are coming over the next 10 years. Yeah. And like I said, the thing that always concerns me that I never see in the narrative about these technologies is society really ready for that? Are we ready to take on these challenges? Are we ready to do what it takes and what's necessary in order to adjust social systems and institutions to accommodate these new realities?
Yeah.
To play the devil's advocate.
And I would argue that we are not. We are, and the fact that we're not already having these conversations and thinking seriously about this sort of thing remains to be concerning. As hopeful as I am that all of these things do come to pass.
Right. Well, let's get the facts and evidence, so that we can have a proper civilizational debate. Because in my version of the future, the average person can explain the central dogma of molecular biology to me. Let's do that for one. The other is I think the answer to your question is society ready for technology development? The answer, I think, since the beginning of technology, and we push forward anyway. I don't.
Well, but what I'm saying is that's the problem.
Yeah.
But you have just articulated exactly what the problem is. Right. We do it anyway when we're not ready for it, and it kills people. It has real life consequences, and people will die.
Right.
Either directly or indirectly.
It always will. I'm just making a bet that vastly more people will die if I don't do this than if I do.
Right.
I have thought it out to that extent. In fact, I think billions of people will die unnecessarily if we don't have molecular sensing at utility scale within a decade. Billions.
And to play the devil's advocate, the concerns that you're citing, Cameron, from an investor perspective, would give investors more reason to want to invest in this kind of project. Say, if it's an inevitability that because of the large amount of data that's aggregated by this whole project, that it would seem that there would potentially be how would you put this? Basically, you could see the government trying to get involved in obtaining that data. And they've done that with other fields like Facebook and all that other kind of stuff, surveillance and whatnot. From an investor perspective, that would be more reason to go and invest in something like the Demonpore, because of the tailor-made products that would go in it. If Pfizer and Moderna and all these pharmaceutical companies, ended up with this data and whatnot, that might not necessarily be a bad thing. You know what I mean?
Well, so something
Of course,
about
yes.
having these instruments is if somebody just gives them to you and says, "Here, take this, and I'm going to control it," and you're not going to learn anything about it, then it's going to be abused. It's going to be subject to totalitarianism and control. If we move fast enough before governments see us coming, then we'll really be democratizing the power to see molecular reality. If we don't do this right, or if we don't move fast enough, then it's going to happen anyway, but you're not going to have control over the sensors around you, and you're not going to get to see the data. Worst case scenario, right? The technology either gets deployed by horrible totalitarian assholes anyway, or it gets deployed by someone like me who has at least a libertarian streak. So a progressive libertarian streak. I should add. Oh, I know it's not your shirt. All right. Here's the meta of a podcast. I'm walking around the place that I live pushing a chair. It's a long story. We are flesh and blood creatures.
Yes. Well, that's all very interesting. I think one of the, final thought here. I think one of the problems with the modern zeitgeist of technology is the idea that, let's move faster than the government so it gets to the people before government has a chance to either stop it or co-opt it.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that in many aspects, but that also bypasses the process of society getting to have its say about what is happening or not. Therein, I think, is where the problem is.
Cameron, I just cannot see a benevolent reason. I can't see a good guy's reason that we would leave that up to the government and society when we can give the people the freedom to see cells and molecules now. Like it seems like if you can propose a good reason that we shouldn't let people have that power, I'm all ears.
I think on the face of it, if it was just that, I would agree with you. I don't see any reason for people not to be able to engage with this knowledge and understand this new reality of which, the average person knows practically nothing on the face of it like that. But I also know that we said the same thing about Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all of them. We said the same thing about globalization. And then we had all sorts of knock-on problems that we were not looking for, were not prepared to solve, and in many cases have not even bothered to do so. What I guess the outcome I'm trying to avoid is I do not want 10 years from now, in 2031, to be having you back on the podcast to talk about the perils or not of, legislation pending in Congress regarding the dispensation of personal medical diagnostic data from, biomolecular research that's being conducted, or or what to do when, somebody, hacks your biology and, or whatever have you. I don't want to be sitting here 10 years from now having that conversation and being like, oh, well, now the horse is out of the barn. What are we going to do? How do we stop it? Because these are the conversations we're having about social media. And in 10 years, and in the middle of that, we're also going to be like, and on top of that, what the hell are we going to do about AI? And on top of that, what are we going to do about 3D printed manufacturing? And what are we going to do about job losses from automation? I mean, all of these things are coming all at once, right now, and we're not ready. And that
Right.
For the average person is frightening. And for me as a political scientist, I look at history and I'm kind of like, oh, we are so screwed. Like, oh, help.
Okay.
Like this will not end well for us. And so every time I've been probably very mean to you this podcast. I'm usually much nicer. But every time I have someone like you on, I always approach it from this way, and I always have these conversations because I want to get people thinking about this stuff before it happens. And I want to get people like you who are at the nexus of invention and investing and all this type of thing to have these conversations too, and to think about these things too, because I'm just a lowly journalist and a novelist. I am not involved in any of these things, and I never will be. I'm a large Black dude who's autistic. Our society has no use for people like me. So the best I can do is produce yet another podcast the world that does not need, invite people on like yourself, and start picking your brain about this stuff and starting these conversations and getting people cogitating about it. And perhaps if I've said these things, perhaps this moment, these 2 hours that we've spent together will stick in your brain down the road. And it will, when you get to go to the meetings where these sorts of things are being talked about and these sorts of decisions are being made, places I will never be able to go and wouldn't be welcome to if I was invited. Perhaps this conversation will shift some perspective, and perhaps in my own little way, I will have planted a seed in someone like you to start thinking about this sort of thing, and the narrative can shift. So at the same time we're developing this technology, we're also thinking about what we need to do as a society to fully prepare ourselves for it, and to start the conversation sooner rather than later. So this is just one small, irrelevant person out in the world mentioning it to you because I happen to have the chance.
We should also, to kind of tie all this together with all of these concerns, have we asked the question, just plain, I guess, what are you going to do to go and protect this data from being used by bad actors? Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. I mean,
data security is already a huge problem that we're not handling well. And the more data we're producing, the worse it's bound to get.
Yeah, I mean, none of those are easy questions. Those are all good points.
Like I said, yes.
Yeah, I mean,
as I said, I'm not trying to be mean or malicious or talk you out of doing what you're doing. I think this technology is fascinating. I'm going to pay my $100 so I can get one. I want one in my home.
Okay.
So let me just say, I am in favor. I am all about it. But like I said, I never get to have these conversations with people. I don't get to exist in these spaces because I am neither desired nor required. Nobody wants a novelist the type of lunches you go to. And so when I get a chance to talk to someone who does go to those spaces, I want them to have some fresh ideas in their head the next time they're talking to their friends. That's the only thing I can do in this situation.
Well, we have that in common, Cameron. I'm not welcome in these spaces either. At least not early on. I mean, I'm a weirdo. I came into the world of science from the world we were talking about before the podcast started. And I was an absolute fish out of water in so many ways. And partially because I was very focused on the spiritual side of things, the lived experience. And that gave me a very different perspective, a way of seeing people and social dynamics that I often felt like the only person in a room full of scientists. I would often feel like the only person who had a certain humanistic perspective. And that often led to me feeling alienated or actually being alienated. So I think it's just as simple as come on board and help us. Like this is an epic quest. Like this company, Molecular Reality, it's it's a mission with a startup. It's not a startup with a mission. It's my life. I'm absolutely sincere about it. I'm not at all interested. I have zero interest in being a billionaire that everybody hates, who hasn't done great things in the world. That's not going to get my rocks off. If I have my basic needs met, like I'm not, it actually makes me a bad entrepreneur that I'm not transactionally oriented enough. And I've actually had to learn how to be a little more money oriented. I've had to learn how to think about business. I've had to learn how to think transactionally, because even with like employees, I've struggled to have transactional relationships, and that were only transactional, because I tend to fall in love with everyone. I tend to develop an emotional connection to everyone and see them as an inherent good rather than tools to use to achieve power, which is a very, very useful perspective to have if you're trying to build a big, powerful company. And I lack that. I don't have that orientation, so I have to compensate. And one way to do that is to have power with people and through them rather than over them. So I would much rather have you be a part of this, sincerely welcome, than to feel outcast or not welcome.
Well, no, I mean, I only say that to say that, I'm but a lowly, journalist and writer. I write things, people read them. So unfortunately, I'm of literally no use to your company. I
would disagree,
some
Cameron.
marketing help or something, but so I'm really kind of no use in this field. But like I said, I love talking about new technology. I think it is interesting. It is fascinating. My listeners love talking about it. I love talking about it. All this type of thing. But I'm also a political scientist. I'm a student of people, which really being a writer is being a student of people. And so I'm a student of people. And so when I see someone who is at that nexus of investing capital and like science and all this type of thing, it's like, I want to plant the seed. I want to get them thinking in this way because they usually don't. I want to plant this seed so that from now on, that little seed is going to be there and it's going to germinate and it's going to grow. And maybe, just maybe, it will cause a little tiny bit of change, or it might start a conversation that would have never started. And it's my own little private one-man influence campaign. And unfortunately for you, over the course of this podcast, you have been a victim of this little campaign. And I'm just trying to have the tiniest micro amount of influence to be kind of like, keep doing what you're doing. I love it, but maybe think about this over here. I'm not here just ideas.
I've enjoyed this. I haven't felt like a victim at all, but I appreciate that it's been, we're coming from very different perspectives. It's valuable. It produces dynamic energy. I've loved it. I've really enjoyed it.
And something that's interesting is the data can actually be secured. If there's worry, which would certainly be warranted, that unauthorized access or there could be people with ill intent that would try and access some of that data. It would be beneficial to have somebody with a social understanding of things like eugenics and stuff like that, and all the many weird incarnations it's taken and takes in, a lot of different industries. But to actually secure the data on the device and in the network could actually be done with Shannon grade security. I won't get into the specifics of that, but I could tell you with 100% certainty that can actually be done.
Excellent. Yeah. Good.
Absolutely.
There's a few weird laws about stuff that you can talk about and things that you can't, like, divulging stuff, the different measurements and weights of you need to make nuclear weapons and stuff like that. And the law is kind of weird and shady on this particular area. But when people tell you that there's no way to go and encrypt something and decrypt it with Shannon grade security, they're out of their fucking minds, and that's absolutely false. It can be done with simple pen and paper, and there's other ways to apply that. And the key distribution, there's ways to go and work around the key distribution as well. It can be done.
No, but those are but again, that's another aspect of it which we don't have time to get into because this has gone on way too long, and I'm going to wrap this up. But that's another aspect of it where like those are the types of things that we need to be thinking about. So it's yes, but so I do want to end here though, Ken. So why don't you give us a final thought and let us know where you can find the whole thing online, and just kind of tie it, bring it all together for us. Give us your elevator pitch.
I love you all, and go see molecularreality.com. That's all.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kent, and thank you very much, Woody, for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast. I appreciate it. This has been a wonderful, amazing, important conversation, and I hope everybody kind of plows through the long time it'll be to listen to it. But thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.